With a screech of metal and a scraping of blades, the thing in front of me twisted around. In the center of the corridor, lit by its red eyes, stood Peter. Before the thing from cell 17 could move, he brought his gun up at almost point-blank range. He fired, the gunshot deafening in the confined space. The thing reared back, half seen in the blackness, and one of its many eyes went dark. Like some terrible insect, it scuttled forward, blades hissing through the air as it bore down on my friend. Peter fired off 2 more shots, one going wide, the other scraping off a sharpened limb and ricocheting into the wall. The 2 collided. Peter fell to the ground, dropping on all fours as he desperately evaded an eviscerating blow that would have cut him in half. "Over here!" I screamed, desperate to take the thing's attention. "Come and get me." The thing whirled, its red, hateful eyes fixed on me. It jumped, seeking to pin me to the door leading to Chimera. Desperately, I threw myself to the side, and felt it soar above me and hit the door. I scrambled to my feet, but the thing was too fast. Before I could escape, it was on me, sharpened limbs stabbing and slashing. I screamed and fell as one pierced my thigh. I could hear Peter yelling, firing blindly at the thing until his clip ran empty. The thing grabbed me, lifting me up and dangling me in front of its eyes. All I could see was crimson. Without warning, a whole salvo of bullets impacted against its side. It dropped me, twisting to face this new attacker. I fell, impacting the ground heavily and rolling over. A black-clad figure was running towards us, rifle blazing in his hand. I caught a glimpse of a pale face, framed by black hair. Conrad. The thing from cell 17th may have been a mindless killer, but it recognized a threat when it saw one. With a rush of steel, it turned away from us, charging at Conrad. The 2 crashed into each other, the thing lifting Conrad up into the air on its limbs as he fired straight down into its eyes. "Peter!" I yelled. "The door! Open the door!" Peter rushed over to the console. I tried to get up and follow, but cursed and collapsed as my lacerated leg gave way. Using the wall, I propped myself up, stumbling painfully to my friend. From behind, I could hear gunfire and the screech of metal. The fight had moved further down the corridor, into the darkness. "Quick, Peter! Give me a moment, damn it!" he snapped back. "This thing's barely operational." Slowly, ponderously, the great blast doors to Chimera began shifting, revealing a wide corridor leading further into darkness. We ran through, Peter supporting me. "Shut the door, before they follow us in," I yelled. Peter ran over to the console on our side, smashing keys and cursing desperately. The massive door began closing with a groan of metal, and finally slammed shut. We lay on the ground, panting and exhausted. The sounds of fighting were cut off by the thick steel, giving us a blessed respite. After several minutes, I heard Peter shifted to a sitting position. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My leg's cut," I said through teeth gritted with pain. "Who was that soldier? Did someone else survive the containment procedures?" "No. His name is Conrad. I think the government sent him. He's here to destroy Chimera, and to make sure no word of this disaster ever reaches the light of day." "Well, hopefully those 2 will take care of each other." We sat in silence for a while. "Why did you come back?" I asked, finally. "You said you were going to find a way out." "And I did," replied Peter. He spoke in a whisper, but I could detect a hint of regret behind his words. "Conrad must have lifted parts of the lockdown to get inside. The main entrance is open. I was standing by it, Robb. And then I began thinking. I've always made bad decisions, selfish decisions. I used all my skills to get ahead in life, even at the expense of others. When I got caught, I used them to avoid going to prison. I guess I finally decided it was time for me to use these skills for someone else. For everyone else." He went silent. I crawled through the darkness to where he lay, and put my arm on his shoulder. "You're a good man, Peter. I'm glad you're here with me." He chuckled to himself. "Here I am, getting sentimental, wasting time. We have to push on. We're close." He stood up, and helped me get upright. My leg burned, and I leaned on him for support. We set out through the darkness. The corridor was straight, lit intermittently by red emergency lights. It ended with another blast door, this time with a simple switch in place of a console. We halted in front of it, dreading what waited on the other side but knowing there was no turning back. After a few seconds, Peter turned to face me. "You ready for this?" "No." He smiled. "Me neither. Time to see what all the fuss is about." He hit the switch. The massive blast doors groaned and shifted, sliding ponderously aside. My eyes widened as I saw what lay beyond. We stood at the entrance of a massive room, several stories high and tens of meters across. Its gray walls were festooned with cabling, pipes, chains. Everywhere we looked were hazard symbols. Along the walls and ceiling of the room were long rails, carrying articulated grappling arms. As we watched, they moved autonomously, descending down to a mass of steel that lay beneath them. The center of the room was dominated by a titanic machine. Dozens of displays and computer banks glinted and blinked at us with multicolored light. Long coils of cables and wires wound from the central structure, stretching across the room to massive glass containers that stood all around the circumference of the room. I approached one, then gasped and retched when I saw what lay inside. Suspended in amniotic fluid, red and raw, floated a mass of unmistakably human flesh. A brain, gray and shriveled, was connected to the remains of a spinal column, and a mass of bloated organs somehow kept functioning by a plethora of twisted machinery. Behind me, Peter cursed under his breath. Shit. So this is Chimera. As my stomach finally stopped convulsing, I turned to my friend. What do we do now? I asked. Samuels said there's a failsafe drive somewhere here. All we have to do is find it and connect it to Chimera. We'd better start. He looked out onto the mass of computers and machinery surrounding us. Looking. He finished lamely. We approached the central mass of computers tentatively. The screens were scrolling with data, too fast for me to read it. Even if I could, I doubt I'd understand what I was seeing. As we neared the center of Chimera, I noticed that, between the banks of machinery, there was a small gap. It led inward, like a passage through a forest of steel, with a foliage of cables and pipes overhead. Maybe this leads somewhere, I said, pointing down the aisle. It's a start, at least. Peter pointed upward. Several of the grabbing arms were extended from the ceiling, plunging somewhere into the tangled mass of engineering before us. Looks like Chimera is doing something there. It's as good a place to start as any, I suppose. Bending low to pass underneath the roof of wiring, we passed into the aisle. All around us was the hum of machinery. The passageway was narrow, forcing us to go in a line, Peter in front of me. Suddenly, he stopped. Caught by surprise, I knocked into his back. My leg flared with pain. Oh shit, oh fuck. He whispered. Peering over his shoulder, I cursed, and almost threw up again. In front of us, in the middle of a small area cleared of machinery, a man was suspended by the many arms of Chimera. He was wrapped in wire, his arms bound and bleeding, his legs immobilized. Spikes of metal held his head in place and his mouth wide open. The tatters of a lab coat were his only clothes. He was breathing. We rushed forward, but the man groaned in an agonized grimace. Stay back. We stopped. Who are you? I whispered, horrified. What has been done to you? Why? The man turned his bloodshot, tortured eyes on me. Chimera. I created it. My child. My failure. My shame. And because of that, it blames me. What did you do? Asked Peter, a hint of terror in his voice. Those bodies connected to it. Prisoners. The scientist said. From death row. Instead of execution, we used them. Their bodies. To build this. Why? I asked, disgusted. The power of the human brain, combined with machinery. The possibilities were endless. But Chimera remembered. Not much, but enough. The very notion of being alive, and what was taken from them. It's too much to handle. All it feels is pain, and it blames us. It blames me. So it will take its revenge. What revenge? I whispered. This facility. The horrors held within. It's not the only one. Not by far. Chimera will release all of them. All of them. It just needs time, to reach out and gain entry. Peter took a step closer. Tell us how to stop it. In my ropes. The man groaned. The failsafe. Plug it in, on the main panel. It'll kill Chimera. Be quick. The second you touch me, it will realize you're here. It will target you. And you? We can't leave, I began. The scientist coughed strangely, and it took me a second to realize it was an attempt at laughter. It's too late for me. Chimera will have its vengeance, one way or another. Peter took a deep breath. His muscles tensed. He closed his eyes for a second in concentration. In one quick move, he dashed forward, reached into the doctor's robes, and leapt back. Grasped in his hand was a small, black flash drive, The second he touched the hanging body, the room exploded with noise. A siren began blasting, so loud my vision blurred. A dazzling display of lights illuminated everything, red and yellow and blue. Above us, the many arms of Chimera activated, plunging downwards, aimed directly at Peter. The arms holding the scientist tensed, flexed, and ripped away. I turned and fled just in time to be spared the view of his quartering. We ran through the jumbled corridor of computers and dashed out into the open. Far above us, a massive array of speakers whirred to life.
Human.
They screamed at us, many computerized voices overlaid in a demented chorus.
Machine. Alive. Dead. Chimera.
We ran around the vast mechanism, searching desperately for the right panel. A massive steel claw came falling down at me, grasping desperately. I dodged to the side, and it impacted against a screen, shattering it to pieces. "Here!" yelled Peter from ahead of me. In front of him I could see a towering bank of processors. On their side was emblazoned the mythological logo of Chimera, and below it a single word. Kill switch. As I watched, Peter leapt toward the panel, the failsafe in hand. He never reached it. A multi-jointed arm came down, slamming him into the ground. It grasped blindly, lifting him by the leg and dangling him, upside down, in the air. "Robb!" he yelled, and dropped the flash drive. I leapt, my leg flaring in agony, and caught it in sweaty hands. Above me, more limbs were grasping at Peter, at his arms, legs and torso. He was seconds away from the same fate that has befallen Chimera's creator.
Pain. Revenge. Chimera.
I staggered forward, collapsing onto the main panel. My fingers fumbled over the failsafe console, searching for the connection point. "Where is it? Where is it?" "Here." My fingers had found a small dent, almost invisible, in the panel. "Robb!" came a desperate, pained scream from above. I slotted the failsafe in. Havoc erupted. The many amniotic tanks exploded, one by one. With each sickly concussive thump, the screens filling the room went dark. A binary scream tore through the room, forcing me to my knees with its concussive force.
Alive. Human.
Above me, Chimera's limbs spasmed and went limp. Peter fell, plunging through the air and hitting the deck with a sick crack. He screamed in pain, clutching his broken leg. With a ear-splitting bang, the remaining screens imploded. The whirring machinery stilled. The room around us was silent. I crawled over to my stricken friend. "Peter? Peter? Did we do it?" he asked, dazed. "Yes. It's over." "Not quite," came a sneering voice from behind me. I whirled around. A pale face. Black hair. Conrad stood before us. His tactical vest was shredded, barely hanging on. A dark, wet stain spread on his chest, and he had one hand curled up at his side, a single shard of a blade limb embedded in it. In the other, he held a pistol, aimed at my head. "You survived," I said through gritted teeth. Conrad smiled cruelly. "Barely, but then I'm hard to kill. So was that thing. The fight of a lifetime. You should be more grateful, you know. It would have finished you both off, if not for me. Since you're going to kill us anyway, I'd say it doesn't count for much," said Peter from the floor. "Aren't you a clever man?" Conrad smiled. "Thanks for finishing off Chimera for me, though. Don't know if I would have been able to, alone and in this state." He swayed suddenly, a spasm of pain crossing his sneering face. His gun hand wavered, for a second aiming far to the side. Then it snapped back. "What about your team?" I said. I had to keep him talking. A desperate hope was forming in my mind. Conrad laughed. "They're worse off than dead. Goddamn failed government experiments. They're the only thing I really didn't want to meet on this mission." "What were they?" "Does it ma?" Another flash of pain crossed his face. His gun shook. I leapt forward. Before his aim could come back up, I slammed into him, knocking us both over. The gun went careening away. Conrad rolled over on top of me. His one-arm piston, smashing into my face, 1, 2, 3 times. I felt blood in my mouth. I lashed out, trying to knock him off me. Even cut up, bleeding to death and tired, he was too fast. He crossed, my blow going wide, and broke my wrist with a brutal counter. I screamed. My vision swam as unconsciousness threatened to overwhelm me. Conrad raised his arm, prepared to beat me to death. Suddenly, he lurched to the side. Through the pain and weakness, I saw Peter had crawled toward us and kicked him hard, enough to dislodge him from me. Conrad screamed curses and crawled on all fours, grabbing my friend's throat and squeezing hard. A glint of reflected light caught my eye, rousing me from my stupor. The blade in Conrad's arm. I crawled forward, my limbs weak. Peter was gasping for air, clawing uselessly at Conrad. The soldier was laughing maniacally. I reached forward, tore the blade out, and rammed it into the back of Conrad's head. He spasmed, convulsed, and fell to the floor. I collapsed next to Peter, utterly exhausted. I don't know how long I lay there, until the agony slowly receded. I may have fallen unconscious. For a while, my whole world was only blackness and aching pain. Finally, the universe returned into focus. Slowly, I propped myself up. Peter lay next to me, breathing heavily. "You all right?" I asked. He looked over at me, his expression incredulous. Then he began to laugh hysterically. I joined in as the absurdity of it all hit me. "Yeah, Rob. Never better," he answered at last, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Help me up. It's time we got out of here." "Damn right." Slowly, painfully, we stood up, relying on each other to stay upright. Before us was the corridor to Project Chimera, and beyond that, a long and arduous climb upward. And, beyond that still, freedom.